Okay.
Okay, let's see how this works. It's redirecting to Facebook Live.
Nice.
So
I like your background.
thank you. It looks okay. It actually is muted, so we shouldn't have a problem with that. And I think we're live. I think we have a viewer starting to come in. We have some viewers coming in.
Great.
Seems to be working, and I'm just going to give a moment for that to happen.
Okay.
And then I'm going to come back over to Zoom, and I think we're good there. Let me check one thing. It's only to see David is ready to. You got it? That was excellent. Thank you. I like your background. I like your horns
Oh yeah.
there.
Do you hear May screaming?
Just a little bit,
Okay.
but it's nice to hear her.
We'll try and keep that down.
No, it's good. Okay, yeah. I don't know if she's making a guest appearance. No,
She
guest
may,
star.
she may barge in actually. It happens about 10 times a day.
Aw, that is so sweet. Okay, well, let me just make sure that we are still live. And then I'm gonna officially greet and welcome you. It looks like we are on. Oh, that was the volume. Okay, you know what I'm gonna do? Sorry about that. This is actually my very first time going on a live chat live stream. I've been doing my weekly Tea with Mimi performances, but it's a little different also coming from Zoom. So I'm glad it seems to be working. And it is my pleasure to welcome you, Matt. This is Matthew Levy, who in the music world needs no introduction. Such a distinguished saxophonist, founder of Prism Quartet, commissioner with Prism of over 250 new works for saxophone quartet, composer himself, recipient of many awards, performed with Philadelphia Orchestra, Cleveland, Detroit, many major orchestras, artists, ensembles, and I'm happy to say not only my dear friend, but collaborator. And Matt has performed with us with Dolce Suono Ensemble as part of our WC celebration a few years ago. And as you know, Matt was going to be performing with us on June 2nd for our Fall for Chamber Music project of a program of chamber jazz and African American music, which of course we had to cancel due to the coronavirus situation, sadly. And for that reason, well, I'm so disappointed we didn't get to do that concert, but looking forward to doing more with you. I
Yeah.
thought it'd be great to just have you on with us today, so at least our Dolce Suono Ensemble friends and listeners can talk a bit, and we welcome your comments and questions, everybody who's on with us. And hello and welcome, Matt.
Wow. Thank you for that introduction. It's great to be here. Yeah, I was really looking forward to playing together and look forward to rescheduling it whenever that works out. But I think I've been a huge fan of Dolce Suono for you've been probably since your first years together, like 15 years ago. Has it been 15 years or so?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're actually celebrating our 15th anniversary, which we just closed our 15th season, but it wasn't too festive, of course, but we're going to be doing a special
Okay.
next season or whenever it's safe to be back together
I mean, it's an amazing ensemble, just the absolute top-notch players, beautiful. The group just sounds incredibly beautiful, and your programming is just really compelling. Just so many different, interesting curatorial ideas that you bring to the mix. So I was always happy to be in attendance or occasionally join you for concerts. So thanks for
together.
thinking of me, including me.
Thank you for those comments, so meaningful coming from you. And actually, that's something we share as performers who run organizations. And of course, Prism. What year did you found Prism?
Way back in 1984, I was in my second year at the University of Michigan as an undergrad. So and at that point I was the youngest member of the group. And so we've had a few member changes over the years, but we keep drawing from musicians and saxophonists from University of Michigan because it's a very specific kind of approach to the instrument. Just in order to find the right kind of sound and blend. So it's really out of that tradition that the group was founded.
Well, I think it's really impressive because, of course, string quartet has a long and rich history and some of the best repertoire out there. Even wind quintet, the woodwind standard ensemble that I get to perform in, has a kind of older repertoire than yours as a saxophone quartet. And just through your own commissioning for Prism, you've not only built a whole entire genre of works, but inspired many other saxophone quartets to form. So how does it feel to have had such a major role in this genre?
It's really exciting. I mean, I was a judge for the Fish-Off chamber music competition this past round, which actually became a virtual competition. So we judged recordings of groups, and there were quite a few saxophone quartets, and many of them played pieces that Prism had commissioned. So that was really gratifying, just to know so much of the repertoire we've developed is in the hands of so many great young players. You know, so that's one of the kind of most rewarding parts of this work. You know.
I can see that because, of course, when you commission your works and perform them, you want to bring them to the world, but the whole goal is to really give them to the world to have future performances by other artists too. So, congratulations on
Oh,
that.
thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think, as you know, when you commission a work, it's a huge amount of effort. So you have to spend sometimes years raising money and developing the idea and producing the concerts, and so in exchange for doing that work, you usually get like a year or two of exclusivity, and then after that, the pieces for anyone to play. So it's nice to see pieces that do move into like the mainstream repertoire. One of the pieces actually that has become really well regarded and played very frequently is a piece that David Ludwig wrote called Josquin Microludes. He wrote for Prism maybe 10 years ago, and that's one of the really the mainstays of the repertoire now. So he's a composer we keep working with, in different projects over the years.
And that's great because we're going to have him join us in a few minutes and we're going to preview our upcoming recording of his work.
Yeah,
Um,
I heard he's making a cameo, and I didn't know if he's bringing one of his four cats or more than one, but he has quite a few cats that you can read about them on his Facebook page.
That's true, and I think one has its own Instagram account as well. So we might see David and his cats, but we've also collaborated with him a lot as Dolce Suono Ensemble, and I personally have as well. And I think we share at least a couple other commissioned composers
Yeah,
between Prism and Dolce Suono Ensemble, such as Stephen Mackey, and I think Viet Quang, who won our
right.
Young Composers Competition, maybe a few others that we both worked with, but
Yeah,
that one other thing I just wanted to kind of mention for our audience today, because they might have questions about this too. I mean, I really admire how multifaceted you are as performer, as composer. I got to play some of your lovely music with you a few years ago, which was amazing. And then, of course, as arts leader and teacher, we're both on faculty at Temple University in
yeah,
saxophone, respectively. Should we trade studios? Maybe not. No, but
yeah.
anyway, and you're also a mentor at Curtis Institute of Music and a lot of other work with young musicians. So, how do you enjoy this very varied career that you have, doing many facets of music, including recording engineering too, and producing?
Yeah. It all just sort of happened organically. I didn't like set out to do all these different things, but I have interest in so many different areas. So just sort of pursuing them all simultaneously led to this kind of career where, um, and it's all sort of, I think it all revolves around the same kind of passion for music, just different facets of music. So, for example, my interest in arts administration was born out of a desire to really develop support and production skills around producing and presenting music. So I mean, it was driven by the actual art form. And then similarly, my work in audio engineering and producing is kind of the final step of that work, where once we play and perform the work, then I was really interested in like all of the technology and you know ways of reproducing those works in recordings. So I was always drawn to technology. I think because as a kid I was obsessed with like comic books and science fiction. So I would when I did my first recording when I was in college, I was fascinated by just like looking at these audio engineers like manipulating sound and all the things they did. So I just sort of learned by attrition over many, many years, just sort of piecing together knowledge about how to record my group, my ensemble, my own solo stuff, other ensembles and groups, and then like how do you get the best sound? How do you? It's sort of like alchemy, How do you? We spend so much time as instrumentalists, like trying to find the perfect equipment, the perfect mouthpiece and reed, head joint. Uh-oh, I hear May. She may barge in any minute now. So I think I apply that same kind of interest to my work as an engineer, like trying to really figure out what equipment to use, what combination of microphones, what what kinds of converters and preamps and that sort of thing, how to place microphones. So all of this work is sort of based on the idea of creating an idealized version of pieces that I have commissioned or played with my quartet or with other groups. So, and I think also, like you, I'm very passionate about teaching, and so in addition to my work at Temple, I've been really interested in working with kids in my neighborhood of Germantown, and on helping them to envision themselves as composers. So Prism's developed a program called Composition for Kids, and another program called Unlocking Your Inner Composer, where we actually work with children to teach them skills of writing music. And then the Prism Quartet will actually play their pieces. So it's sort of, just all these different outlets to engage with people but always around the creation and presentation of music.
That is so fantastic, and even taking the long historical view, it's interesting because in the 18th century, earlier, later 19th century virtuosos, composers and musicians, performers were the same people, like Beethoven, Mozart, Handel participated in the performances of their works, Paganini, the 19th century virtuoso and composer. That kind of thing was very common. I think in the 20th century, we see more of a dichotomy between the performers and the composers. So it's really interesting how you unite that in your career. And then, of course, I think the outreach piece is incredibly important. And it's something I feel passionate about, too, with as a solo artist with my ensemble, too. Teach, but also do community outreach, because I guess both our organizations are Philadelphia-based organizations, and so it's really nice to be able to work with our local communities.
Yeah.
But it's really great that you're encouraging children to compose and guiding them with your quartet.
Yeah, I mean, that's real exciting, and the kids, they have a lot to say, we've had kids in, maybe fourth or fifth grade, and they would create music using graphic notation. One little boy wrote a piece and his idea for the piece was he wanted to reflect musically his experience of like waking up on a Saturday morning and watching cartoons and eating cereal. Sort of a fun experience.
Why not?
And another little girl had just lost her grandmother, and she was trying to express this like really heartfelt grief. And these are kids who, we were just using graphic notation, so it wasn't like detailed notational work. But even through that, they could express themselves, with music, which I think is really important to give that language to children as a means of expression.
Absolutely, it's so great that you can do that, especially so that hopefully some of these young people become concert goers or practitioners, or keep writing music. So that is incredibly special. Soon David Ludwig will be joining us, so we might actually interrupt ourselves. But what I'm going to do, if I'm looking down, it's because I'm taking a look whether we have any comments or questions so far, or we'll come back to them.
Okay.
Okay. I have a great question that we're going to come back to on time management. And what is your secret? Because you have such a busy and varied career. But first, let's admit David into the room. I'm doing right now, and he's coming in.
Oh, what's up, David?
Looking rather Texan today.
Wow.
Oh, David.
Where are you? Where are you?
I'm on my roof.
Roof? You didn't say you had a roof.
I'm sorry. Well, I'm more of a cat person than a dog person.
Okay.
So
Well,
I'm not always into roofs.
wow.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
Well, Well, David, it is great to see you. Matt and I were saying that we so missed performing together as planned on June 2nd as part of Dolce Suono Ensemble's Chamber Jazz and African American music program. And it's just been so many months of not being in person, not making music together and for our audiences. And it's really hard not to you for in real life, but this is great. So it's nice to see you. And David, thank you so much for joining us today. I don't think that you kind of need an introduction because in many ways, but let me just tell our listeners a little bit about you. Our distinguished composer David Serkin Ludwig is here. His works have been performed by the Philadelphia Orchestra, Pittsburgh Symphony, National Symphony, very many distinguished artists and ensembles. He won the Venice Film Festival Award for a film score, in addition to many other awards, and is professor and chair of composition at the Curtis Institute of Music, where we were classmates together. So David, you and I go way back. David is your dear friend, as you know, and let me just say that because I was so young when I started at Curtis, I was 12. I was also quite a bit smaller than my current huge height. Just kidding. And I remember when you picked me up and I think carried me around.
You know, I never had a little sister, so I think you were like 15 or 16 or something. So I would say it was definitely an older brother kind of relationship that we had. But it's been great to kind of grow up together and be colleagues all this time.
It really has, and I've just, as you know, so loved playing your music and commissioning it with Dolce Suono Ensemble and recording it on my CD Odyssey. And I know, actually, we were just before you got here, we were talking, and Matt mentioned that your Josquin microlutes for Prism has become a really standard saxophone quartet, which is phenomenal. And it's great making your music and playing. I think I was counting up how many pieces of yours I played. I might have been 7 or 8. So
you're definitely a Ludwig scholar. I would say you're both of you. I'm speaking with two very distinguished Ludwig scholars right now. So
Ask me anything about yourself.
Let's see. In the first grade, my best friend Ross, I ran into him in a convenience store. Which convenience store was it?
It had to be Wawa.
Yes, in Montgomeryville. This is amazing.
Yeah, I was going to think out loud, but I just knew right away it was Wawa.
Yeah, it's so good.
Maybe.
Gosh, yeah.
Boy, this was what our recording session was like too.
I honestly can't see you in a 7-Eleven. I just can't see that.
No, I would never. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good.
No. Come on.
So in this now online and Zoom room, we have this trio. Well, the three of us had a really great experience premiering or performing actually your Three Anchoress Songs for flute and tenor saxophone, David, and then recording that wonderful piece for forthcoming release. And so, Matt, tell us a little bit about the release, and then we want to hear about the piece, and then we have a special preview. I think Matt's going to play a movement, and then we can talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. This is well, Prism has its own record label called Zos Records, and this will actually be our 10th release since 2016. And we were so fortunate to work with David on this larger piece called The Anchoress, a song cycle, a monodrama that he'll talk about a bit. And then prior to writing that piece, he wrote a kind of, during the gestation of that piece, he wrote a duet for another duo actually, and then kind of adapted it for Mimi and me. So David, maybe if you could say a few words about the duet, we'll play the second movement, the recording of the second movement.
Yeah, sure. And I don't know if we've had a chance to talk about who this Anchoress is. This character who's at the center of the piece. Have we talked about her at all? Or
No.
I'll be brief. I mean, Anchorism was a practice introduced to me by the writer Katie Ford, by the poet, which was a practice of religious asceticism and seclusion, withdrawal from society, quarantine, really. So it's speaking to a lot of us right now. And so I imagined this Anchoress from around 1400, which is when Katie placed her. And for the piece that you guys played, which was written for the Awia duo, I I imagine what would the sound she hears sound like to her from the outside, you know, and the work of Michaud was certainly out there at this time, you know, and she would hear musicians walking by her cell that she could never leave, literally. And what would that sound like to her through the kind of visions and mysticism that she lived through every day? And so we hear this Michaud as the kind of seed of each one of these pieces, but you know, through a lens, through a very kind of almost hallucinogenic lens. And so the players move around as if they were musicians playing together outside, and the sound does the same.
Great. I'll play the second movement. Okay.
Sounds great, Matt.
Oh, David.
You're a wizard. It's awesome, and you both sound incredible playing. You know, Matt made the recording, and you are like the greatest sound guy. What you're doing with these recordings is like alchemy. It's awesome, and both of you are performing, and I mean, what you bring to these little pieces is big stuff. So, thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I'm just so impressed by how poignant a piece that you wrote for just flute and tenor saxophone. It was actually my first time playing a duet of just those instruments. Matt and I have performed trios, usually with alto sax actually, and piano and other instruments, and of course, larger ensembles. But you really encourage us to get such a range of timbre and color and with the effects.
Yeah,
Right?
I wanted to just mention that just the process of working with you is you were incredibly generous, and we tried out lots of ideas, and you know there's like in my part in that movement there's you wrote a kind of an accompaniment, but then gave me the freedom to like improvise on that and insert kind of some special effects, some multiphonic trills and other extended techniques, and it was sort of this dialogue where we kind of worked with you, Mimi and I worked with you to kind of almost make the piece our own in a way that, and you were really encouraging and helped us to kind of like uncover sounds, that were embedded in the piece in a way.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, yeah, I say it a lot, but composers are like playwrights, and the instrumentalists are like actors, and actors are going to know their bodies, their instruments a lot better than you are as the playwright. And so the expertise, the life of performance that you can bring to this, I think is, how would I not want that to be a part of the piece and the life of the piece? So for me, composing is both solitary and totally collaborative. So this was the collaborative part of things, and I love that. I love working with you both.
Well, thank you. I'm just so thrilled to be part of this forthcoming album with your larger commissioned work, The Anchoress. But one question for you, David, before we see if our viewers have questions, is I just love the way you envision the oral world around the Anchoress as she's in her cell there, and just the sounds she would have heard in the late medieval period. How did you come up with that idea, and how did you then steep yourself in these imagined sounds to put them into the music?
Well, I mean, that character and her life and her existence really came from Katie Ford. Um, so in a way, I'm just putting the frame around her painting. But I often like to think about the kind of extended reality, or like Marquez, the magical realism, how that might manifest in music. And so the idea of visions and colors and synesthesia plays a really important part in my work, and in telling stories of the pieces, whatever, be it political or literary or whatever it is.
I would mention that the larger piece, The Anchoress, is a song cycle, for soprano voice, Renaissance wind instruments, and saxophone quartet. And I've been tweaking it and working in post-production on it for maybe 3 months or so. And I've heard it hundreds of times, as I work through it. And I just keep falling more deeply in love with this piece. Like it's one of these pieces that it just has a tenderness, and it draws you into it. And just incredibly beautiful writing. I'm excited for the world to hear it,
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about the sirens and the ice cream truck outside as well, but here we are. I mean, that piece, the way Katie's written that character, needs a really empathetic treatment and a really compassionate treatment, because it's all about the inner life of this woman who has found freedom by withdrawing, by literally living in a cell. And so starting with her words and ending with the unbelievable sensitivity of the playing, and now the recording, I feel like everyone addressed that, everyone who was involved. And it's strangely, we didn't know about this time we're in now.
Yeah.
When we wrote it and performed it, it wasn't a glit in our eye, but it seems so apropos for these times, actually. Yeah. So I think we all played our part, but thank you.
Yeah, we can't wait for it to come out, I think in August, correct? On yes.
August 28th.
Wonderful.
Mark your calendars, yeah.
One thing that we might want to share too is, I mean, it was so much fun to perform this piece in Philadelphia and New York, and then get back together for the recording session, which we did in a few hours, closing around, what was it, 1:30 in the morning?
Yeah.
Which was fine for me. I happen to be a night owl. I'm not sure if you guys are, but I was just sort of starting to come awake at that point. No, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I think what's different too, since we're all in the room and we're talking about working with composers, when you have the composer with you at a recording session, it becomes so collaborative too, because we get to check in with you, we get to try things, we get to have your feedback on especially issues, I would say, of pacing would be one of the most important things that come up when you're recording with the composer. But yeah, I would love to know your thoughts on that experience too, Matt and David.
I just have
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, without just something funny that happened. I think it's worth sharing, just because it was unique to this session, where the piece ends with Mimi and me are we're singing together, and the idea is that we're going into the distance, we're receding into the distance. So we were walking backwards from our stations, like where the microphones were set, and we had to walk. We were in Gould Hall at Curtis, and so we had to walk to the edges of the hall. So by the time you heard the last notes of our singing, it was sort of very distant, and we kept running into issues like tripping over music stands, or Mimi's pants were making noise when they would hit each other, your legs. And so we had about 4 or 5 takes that just didn't work out, but it was just really a funny moment, a kind of funny way to end, sort of stumbling around the hall early in the morning.
It did get out late. I mean, if anyone wonders about what's involved in making a recording, as an example, that's like what, an 8 or 9 minute piece, and we were there for probably 10 hours, and that doesn't even include the setup time that went into it. So not to mention the literally probably hundreds of hours that went into mastering it afterwards and putting it together that you've put into it, Matt. So this is why recordings in part are so special to us in music, is that we put an enormous amount of time and care and effort into these things. But yeah, there was choreography in this one, and there isn't usually. So both of you sing like the musicians meeting together in outside of the Anchoress's anchor hold, and then going their separate ways to end the piece. Yeah. And it comes across beautifully, I must say.
It was definitely fun making our debut, chanting, singing in medieval French while walking. And who knew that my jeans would make a noise that would be picked up by the microphone? So it's a constant learning process. It's great.
As one does.
Yeah, but we can't wait to share the entire work with everybody when the CD comes out. And I'm just going to see if our folks have some questions. Oh, we're getting Ronnie and David some bravos. Thank you. Oh, greetings from Krista. Thank you so much. Yeah, really happy to hear from our listeners if you have any questions or comments for Matt and David while we have them both here. Let's actually talk about the blend of flute and tenor sax, and one movement piccolo and tenor sax. While we have you, David, what was it like writing for these two instruments by themselves? And then maybe we could share a little bit about what it's like playing together.
Yeah, I mean, they're both instruments have really unique characters. Incredibly flexible instruments. Both of them are connected to breath and to voice. And one is a reed and one is not, but they're both wind instruments. And so the blend, I thought you guys worked on that and blended and tuned everything really, really beautifully with great care. So I love writing for them. Sometimes you write for instruments and you think, oh, well, I wish these kind of work together. These are kind of, a bit of an odd couple, but not in this case. And I hope there are a lot more pieces written for this configuration, because there's so much you can do with it, actually. And so much I learned from both of you about what you can do with it. So, yeah, it's a really good experience, I would say.
It inspired us to do more, I think, for this. So how about you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, my concern was that the saxophone can have kind of a tubby sound that can overpower, a flute or piccolo. And I think, but the way the piece was written, it sort of took that into account. So it was sort of idiomatic, and really, because David has written quite a bit for both flute and sax, so I think he had a real understanding of where the blend works together. And so, but that's something we also continue to work on. The original version was for alto sax and flute, and after a lot of experimentation, David adapted it for tenor, which I think helped kind of separate the instruments a bit in terms of timbre, and allowed the range to go a little bit lower so that we could get more separation. And also, the low register in the tenor sax is so rich and resonant that can be a nice foundation for for flute or piccolo solos. So I think the orchestration worked really beautifully. I'm excited to do more duets with you, Mimi, to find more,
Yeah.
develop more pieces.
Your sound could never be tubby, but absolutely the independence of our ranges is helpful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I thought only tubas were tubby.
Yeah, well,
Like Tubby the tuba.
who?
Certain ring to it
Tubby
that
the tuba.
I don't know anything about that.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it was, it's commissioned by this duo, the Awiya duo, and it's Jennifer Brimson Cooper, the flutist, if you know her, Mimi, and Mas Sugihara, wonderful saxophonist. And I loved the idea. And when they came to me, I was kind of also thinking about the Anchoress. So I thought this actually would be an ideal thing. And then as we got closer to doing the Anchoress and putting on that concert and making a concert out of it, talking about to Matt how the tenor could work, it really did work really quite well. So I'm grateful for them, commissioning the piece, and they've played it wonderfully. It in a way, it's a kind of different piece with the tenor as well. It's kind of two facets of the same idea. So I'm excited. I hope there are more flute and sax duets that come out of this, and I know that's a big goal of theirs. They kind of exist to create that repertoire, so that's cool.
I think at one point we talked about tenor and alto flute, like we were just sort of branding ideas about. But we kind of, it was interesting to kind of go through that process to see, like because every combination produces a really different world of timbre and color. And Mimi had the idea of switching.
Mimi's not big on the alto, though, is she? Are you big on the alto, Mimi?
Alto is a bit big on me. No, actually, I think alto flute, I love it. I thought it wouldn't work for this piece as much just because of the overall less heft, I guess, of the sound in comparison with saxophone. But I do love playing it or in some pieces.
Yeah, I guess where it works, it works.
I tend to go up, I guess, for piccolo, but we have a question from Victor Kako. Victor, hello, thanks for being here. He asks, how will the CD be available?
How will it be available? Through through all the major outlets. We're producing a physical CD, so anyone would be able to purchase it through Prism's website or Amazon or anywhere like that. And then, of course, it'll be released digitally through Spotify, iTunes. Basically, it's distributed by Naxos of America, so it goes everywhere, basically. But yeah.
Great, thank you for that question. And another comment, Susan Jennings, thanks for listening. Lovely, continuous beauty. Thank you very much, everyone who's with us today. And David, thanks for coming in to join for this preview and talk.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have to 23 Skidoo now, and I'm sorry for all the outside noise, but I don't get out much these days, so I appreciate being able to, and I'm sorry for the cowboy hat. That's not my usual gear, but it's sunny and we burn and forget about it. So anyway,
it's a good look. Yeah.
You like the look? You think so?
Yeah.
All right, maybe I'll do this more.
I think you should have a cigar.
Yeah, I could do that. Cigar. Yeah, something.
Yeah, something. I don't know.
Something, maybe some wheat or a little. Some chaw, maybe.
Yeah. Tobacco.
Right.
Yeah, some tobacco up in here.
I'm sorry, Mimi, because Matt and I could probably do this for the next 3 or 4 hours without being serious. So
I usually would be party to that, or we have our own silliness going back to Curtis days, I think.
Yeah, we do. Well,
can I just ask?
Silliness is good right about now.
Were you carrying? I know you were carrying Mimi around.
Yeah.
Like a little sister. Having. Did you do that with a lot of people?
Not a lot. No.
Maybe 3 or 4.
No, I don't think. Not at the same time.
At a time.
And actually, amazingly, Mimi used to carry me around too.
Really?
Which was she's very strong, unnaturally strong.
I hold that flute up, an alto flute.
It's hard, yeah. People don't appreciate how hard it is, like to hold your arms in that position to play flute for hours on end.
That's true. It's like quite a Pilates kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't really realize it, but that's an interesting point. Like the athleticism behind what we do on the instrument, because the flute doesn't weigh a lot, but I do hold it all day, and saxophone weighs a lot, though, doesn't it?
But I mean, soprano sax is hard because you have to hold the weight of it in your hands, but the other saxophones use like neck strap or a,
Yeah, they have a strap, Mimi.
yeah.
How
So
hard? Come on.
it's
I
not
mean,
nearly as bad as a
you
flute.
know, that flute and your arms are. So she would just kind of throw me over her shoulder like a sack of potatoes, and you know, I it was fun. She carried me up the stairs, the third floor, and back. Really impressive. So
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
yeah, yeah, freakishly strong. Anyway,
Thanks so much.
bye. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to
See you
see you
later.
guys.
You too.
Do it again. Bye bye.
Here. Okay. I think we're good. Hi, Matt. Here you are.
We're back.
Great. Thanks, everyone, again, for joining for this conversation with Matthew Levy. Matt is here. David Serkin Ludwig just joined us. And I'm just checking to see if anyone, please share your questions, comments, thoughts. Definitely want to get back a little bit to you, Matt, and some of your recent projects and current projects, both in curation and also you have a solo saxophone album coming out, which I've been so interested and excited to hear. And would love to know a little bit more about that too. I mean, that's pretty rare, right? Solo saxophone CDs.
Yeah, I mean it's a very narrow window of concert saxophone CDs are very niche, you know. But there is a whole vibrant community of classical saxophonists, and it's very similar to like the flute world, where there's a sort of concerted effort to support one another, to record. So there's a lot going on, but I think for the general public, it's still very much on the margins of classical music. You know, I think the field of chamber music is very conservative. So if you look at if you survey the concert presenters around the country, probably 80 or 90% of what they're presenting is like very traditional string quartets, piano trios. So I think groups like Prism and other groups that are newer historically are not as well represented, not as well known. And so that was one of the reasons for really developing our own concert series, our own record label, in order to provide a platform for our creative work that is, because I think that is because many labels and presenters are kind of risk averse. We wanted to be able to be very free in thinking about our instruments and our programs without the constraints of of having to play everything on tour. We do touring, of course, but we also want sort of a platform for our own research and development of newer works.
Well, I think both of us, all of us who are woodwind, brass, saxophone, players are to some extent ambassadors for our instrument because, of course, flute as a solo and chamber instrument is quite well known, but not at all as well known or with a lot of repertoire that is just not as mainstream as the string and piano repertoire. So I think I know I personally love to not only bring out works that are for my instrument or combinations of woodwinds or mixed ensembles of winds and strings and piano, but give those works more awareness, but also create more works through arrangements and commissioning composers. And so I really, of course, commend you on what you're doing. Branching out from 4 saxophones to 1 as well is pretty awesome. But going back to our question from Ronnie Gordon, thanks, Mom. Great question because, Matt, you have such a diverse career as performer, composer, arts organization leader, teacher, and everything. What is your secret of time management? Great question.
That is I haven't thought a whole lot about that, but I would say it really is about just planning and being organized. And so for example, all of my work with Prism is planned out usually 2 or 3 years at a time. So we're setting schedules, and the group meets at least once a month to kind of work through scheduling. And then I have to sort of do that with all of my different projects, where I kind of look at time frames, timelines, and try and squeeze everything in. I don't get to everything, so it's not as if I'm not doing as well in that regard as I would like, but it's something that's like a work in progress, I think one of the silver lining with regard to the pandemic is that it's kind of freed me up to work on lots of recording projects. Prism has been recording maybe for the last 6 or 7 years, putting stuff in the can. So we've got 7 recordings that we'll be releasing over the next year. So just just being kind of isolated at home has given me an opportunity in a way to really kind of go deeply into our recording projects. And then I'm doing my own, I'm doing my own solo recordings. I have one coming out in the fall called Sum of Its Parts. And for the solo recordings, I'm very interested in building a repertoire for the tenor sax, because there's so little repertoire for that particular saxophone. And it's one of my very favorites. And so I've been working with composers who are recording me creating lots of different sounds, like extended techniques, long tones, different articulations, and multiphonics, subtones, everything within the kind of sound world that's possible, and kinds of sounds that I love to make. And then taking those sounds and manipulating them in the computers to create a kind of accompaniment for my live saxophone. So this first recording coming out is 2 pieces by 2 rising star composers, Emma O'Halloran and Jacob Walls, that are both pieces for tenor sax with electronics. And I'm planning other recordings in that sort of using the same kind of idea with other composers, including James Primosh, Aaron Bush, Nick DiBardino. So it's sort of like a long-term project to do some solo work that goes beyond my work with Prism.
That's great, and it's interesting how you're doing it kind of live saxophone with sampled recording saxophone. And you mentioned Jim Primosh, professor at University of Pennsylvania, whose music I've played, and very, very fine composer. So I'm very excited to hear that. Another question from our live stream is, did you start on clarinet before saxophone?
No, I started on alto sax, which is this kind of typical saxophone you start on. I was in maybe, I guess, 5th grade, and I just thought it was a really cool instrument. It was shiny, And then when I got to college, I actually started off as a woodwinds major with a focus on saxophone. I wanted to kind of be a doubler. So I did play clarinet briefly, but I just I couldn't make it work, I felt too constrained, it felt too rigid, or I just couldn't, it didn't flow. And at that point, I didn't love the clarinet like I do now. Like, I've come to really love the clarinet. It's an incredible instrument. But back then I was thinking, I could take a pass on that.
Well, clarinets don't get along, but I've always loved clarinet because I grew up with my mother and brother playing clarinet in our house, and then they would also sometimes cross over into saxophone. So I wondered if it went in that direction for you. Well, the obvious question: if you were studying woodwinds, how did it go on the flute, Matt?
Oh yeah. My wife Ola just found this picture of me in high school playing flute.
Whoa! I gotta see that. That is awesome.
Just by chance, I just happened to have it on my desk. But
if you're playing flute, wow.
Yeah, it was. I took some lessons. I had a great sax teacher, Charlie Salinger, and his wife was a flute teacher, so I studied with both of them actually. But flute, I was hyperventilating, getting dizzy.
Well, I have a problem making sound on saxophone or clarinet. I mean, that doesn't work for me. I really admire doublers and jazz musicians who do it, which kind of gets us a little bit into the jazz aspect of some of your work compositionally, stylistically, and then also the program that we didn't get to do on June 2nd was going to be very exciting with its chamber jazz and African American composers music angle. We were going to be performing with Charles Abramovic, core DSC pianist, and of course my pianist duo partner of many years, and also Mike Boone, phenomenal bass and jazz artist, and fellow faculty member at Temple, actually was going to be joining our ensemble again for that, coming from the jazz world, with some Jelly Roll Morton and Fats Waller and other pieces, as well as classical pieces. But yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about you and that style.
Yeah, I made a decision back in high school. I love jazz. It's a real passion. I just absolutely love jazz. But when I was in high school, I also discovered classical music, and I decided I would really focus on classical saxophone. So I went to study with Donald Sinta at the University of Michigan, But I always just loved jazz, and it's been like part of my DNA in some way. I just didn't, I decided as a player I would focus primarily on classical music, but it still is part of my playing in many regards, and especially part of my compositional work. I'm just very influenced by the great jazz masters and their work. And with Prism, I helped to lead a project called Heritage Evolution, where we have invited, at this point, it's like 9 or 10 of the world's great, excuse me, turn that phone off, of the world's great jazz saxophonists to join us to create music for Prism with them as soloists. And so to bridge the divide, between classical and jazz saxophone in some way. And so we have like our upcoming collaborators are Branford Marcellus and Melissa Aldana. But we've worked with Joe Lovano and Chris Potter and many others. So to me, I don't think you can separate the saxophone by style because the culture of the instrument is so rooted in jazz, and so many classical composers draw on that history of the instrument. So you have to be able to at least play jazz stylistically as a classical saxophonist. And then, of course, someone like Branford Marcellus can play jazz and classical in an incredibly high level. So he's like a rare bird in that regard.
Wow, well, what a great concept for that project.
Yeah.
I look forward to listening to you. I have a couple questions or topics that I would love to talk with you, but also just want to welcome our viewers to write in the comments any thoughts or questions that we could also involve in the Q&A. But of course, the reason why we're here now, of course, is because of the whole COVID-19 situation, canceled concerts since mid-March going on kind of indefinitely for us. So I thought we could talk a little bit about what the future might hold for us as artists, but also as entrepreneurs and artistic directors of our own ensembles. And just how are you dealing with this uncertainty, Matt, for Prism's plans?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. We had a project that had been in the works for maybe 3 or 4 years called Mending Wall, which is a project that involves a Dutch stage director, guest artists like Arturo O'Farrell and Tony Arnold. We commissioned 4 composers, and this was a project that was enormously expensive. It was fully staged, and it was scheduled for March 20th. So we had to cancel it, and then we just pushed it back 2 years, basically. So because I think that the challenge is with a project like that, where so many resources are brought to bear, we wanted to not ensure that it was most likely to happen. I think next season is very much of a question mark, at least through December, maybe beyond. So we didn't want to schedule that particular project for next season and risk it falling through again. So we basically are programming next season toward the end of the season with the idea that it's likely that we wouldn't be able to do concerts until like January, February, March or so. And focusing our energy on these recording projects, but it is, we're fortunate because the 4 members of the group are all like college professors and have other, forms of income and other aspects of their career that will sustain them. I'm mostly worried about freelance artists who have depended almost exclusively on like gigging. I think for them it's a really scary time, but I think for Prism, we're going to focus on the areas on which we can focus and really try and thrive in that way around these recording projects. But yeah, how about for Dolce Suono? What are your plans?
I mean, I think similarly, we are looking ahead at possibly a season of no concerts with audience the way we were used to. We're working on a lot of contingency plans, even though we announced our season, and we usually do 4 DSC Presents concerts in Philadelphia, plus our Fall for Chamber Music and other community engagement projects in Philadelphia and the area, and then touring. And so we're kind of just trying to find new ways of connecting with our audiences. Meanwhile, through technology, I'm doing a solo live stream. We're going to bring some guests into there and just kind of stay in touch with everyone and do what we can, just when it's safe to come back. And I think part of the concern is, when will it be back to normal, or what will the normal look like later on? It might be quite different, and I think
Yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
concerning for the arts, across the board. And so I guess we're just trying to stay flexible. We're going to try to stay, lean and solvent and able to deal with whatever the situation brings. But it's a lot of concern, of course.
Yeah. I think it's hard to, I haven't embraced doing a lot of things online at this point, and I think partly because um, I spend so much time in front of the computer right now that like producing stuff that you have to experience in front of a computer is kind of hard for me. But I think we'll probably move in that direction eventually, But I really love the work you've been doing, like the Tea with Mimi. I've learned quite a bit watching your Tea with Mimi's, and it's really amazing. I mean, because it's about scholarship and contextualizing flute repertoire and understanding its history and how it relates to other fields and disciplines. So I think that's a really great use of a way to approach programming, right now.
Thank you so much. It's been nice being in touch with people that way and sharing a little bit of the scholarly that I do in addition to performing, or just the merge of those. But thank you, Matt. And I'm gonna go to our online listeners for a second. Cynthia Lee, thank you for your lovely comment about the interview. Victor, uh, Matt, are you sponsored by Yamaha Music?
Oh, I'm a Selmer artist, so I work with Selmer. I was a Yamaha artist for many years, but eventually we moved to Selmer, and the entire Prism Quartet is now, we're all Selmer artists. But Yamaha makes great instruments also.
Well, I love my Yamaha flutes. I'm a Yamaha artist,
Okay.
performing artist and clinician, and they're just absolutely wonderful to work with for the instruments and for their emphasis on education. But yeah, I actually wanted to ask you, does it matter if the saxophone quartet has the same brand of saxophone?
Actually, so I was really married to my Yamaha custom sax. I had one of the very first ones when they came out, and I loved it. And I continued to play with it in Prism, and eventually the other three members were all playing Selmers. And it sounded good, it was fine, but I think having a consort of instruments by the same makers does create a better blend. There's the timbre of the instrument melds more beautifully with the other instruments around it. So I think for Prism, that move really helped our sound to kind of blend a little better. So, and that was the point at which we became Selmer artists as an ensemble as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And of course, the blend is phenomenal on the Prism. It's really incredible. You're like one. But yeah, so one last question for you has to do, Matt, with, do you have advice for young musicians? It could be a broad question, or especially perhaps directed at your multivalent career, people who are interested in performing and perhaps teaching and administering an ensemble, or composing as well. So yeah, just kind of take it away.
Yeah, yeah. I would say for young musicians, especially if you're just getting into college, just starting your academic life at the university or conservatory, to kind of survey all of your different interests in music. Not just, you may principally be interested in playing an instrument, but to survey all the things that you're passionate about in music and see if you can simultaneously develop those as well, so that you're better positioned to have a career that isn't rooted on just having that one skill set of playing an instrument really well, but that coalesces all of your different interests in music into like a more multifaceted kind of range of skills that can, I think, in a way, advance your careers beyond what you might be able to do just as a great player. Because I think we've seen, I think there is also in academia, there's recognition that, just being a factory for producing great orchestral musicians doesn't always serve the musicians well. And I think the work you've done, Mimi, like as the artistic director of Dolce Suona, is a really good example. You could be playing in any major orchestra in the world, and you decided you wanted to have agency for your career to curate and present programs, and create your own opportunities. And I think I think that's a really smart move because you're not at the mercy of forces around you. You're creating your own opportunities. And I think for young musicians, I think that's also really good advice. So if you have interest in arranging, composing, playing other instruments, music theory, composition, technology, arts administration, most major universities have programs in all of those areas. So why not try and explore them and explore the ones that are of most interest to you as a young person.
Well, thank you for what you said, Matt. And I mean, I think that's wonderful advice. I think the music world is ever more embracing of kind of hybrid careers, doing different areas. But I also think that really is good for artists, in that being an artist is already such an effort for self-discipline in a difficult world, but also you really have to be yourself. You have to follow your own path. Something I've always felt strongly and luckily been encouraged to do by my family and mentors and people that I encountered in the field. And I think if we do that, if we young musicians do follow their own path, it will help that become a
Yeah,
more
I think, and it's more enriching. It's a more complete experience, and you have a degree in history from Penn, and that comes to bear on your programming very deeply. So I think all of these things will inform who you are as a player, and how you think about the music you want to play. So that's my main advice, really. I get nervous when I see like performance majors who are just so narrowly focused on playing well, which I mean that should be their main focus, but sometimes it can be detrimental to exclude all of the other things that are possible that could be part of your persona and as a player.
Yeah, no, I think this is so fantastic, and I just want to say thank you, Matt, for joining me here for Dolce Sono Ensemble's very first interview live stream on Facebook. It's been great seeing you, and I just can't wait to play with you live. I can't wait for our recording of David Serkin Ludwig's Three Anchoress Songs to come out. And I also just want to say once again hello and thank you to everybody who joined us today and for your supportive comments. And this video will stay up so people could continue to see it. And if you want to load more comments or questions in, we'll monitor it and get back to everybody.
Yeah, great to see you, Mimi. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you, Matt. Talk to you really soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye.
Okay, bye.